The morning after Arthur Jr.'s wedding dawned with an unnerving stillness, a silence that felt profoundly wrong after the boisterous, albeit strained celebration of the previous day. I, Theodore Vance, a man who had always prided himself on his sharp business acumen and his unwavering faith in the inherent goodness of his family, awoke with a peculiar lightness, a fleeting sense of peace that was quickly overshadowed by a creeping, pervasive unease. The wedding of my son, Arthur Jr., to Clara had been a triumph, a lavish affair that had cost a considerable sum, but one I had financed with unreserved enthusiasm, eager to give my only son the perfect start to his married life. I had always seen Arthur Jr. as a chip off the old block, a young man with immense potential, albeit one who occasionally required a gentle financial nudge, a guiding hand in the often treacherous waters of business and life. Clara, his new wife, possessed a polished veneer, a bright spark that I had hoped would temper Arthur Jr. The occasional impulsiveness and ground him. Their decision to stay at a nearby hotel, rather than complicate our family home with their new beginnings was, I had thought, a thoughtful gesture of consideration, a sign of their maturity. But this morning, the house felt too quiet. There was no sign of Arthur Jr. or Clara, no cheerful morning greetings, no casual mention of their plans for the day. A strange unease began to coil in my gut as I padded into the kitchen, the familiar, comforting scent of brewing coffee doing little to dispel it. I decided to check my bank balance, a routine check to ensure all wedding expenses had been settled and that my own accounts were in order, a habit ingrained from decades of careful financial management. My heart seized. The number displayed on the screen was not merely low, it was zero. Not just zero, but a negative balance, indicating a significant overdraft. My account, usually a healthy testament to years of diligent saving and successful business dealings, had been utterly depleted. Every penny, meticulously managed, every transfer, every deposit, it had all vanished overnight. A cold dread, sharp and paralyzeringly real, seeped into my bones, far more chilling than the crisp morning air that filtered through the window panes. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling slightly, to call Arthur Jr., but a primal instinct, a whisper of betrayal that resonated deep within my soul, screamed in my mind. He, my son, the young man I had raised, supported, and trusted implicitly, was the only other person with access to my accounts beyond my own oversight, a concession I had made to help him manage the wedding finances smoothly, to ensure his and Clara's comfort during that stressful period. The stillness of the house suddenly felt sinister, the silence no longer peaceful, but pregnant with a terrible, dawning realization. The wedding, it seemed, was not just a celebration. It was the meticulously orchestrated exit strategy for a grand, devastating con. The financial depletion wasn't an error. It was a calculated theft, executed with chilling precision. The wedding itself, a blur of champagne toasts, forced smiles, and Arthur Jr. S. increasingly anxious glances towards Clara now seemed like a meticulously staged charade, the culmination of a long, insidious plan. Looking back, the years leading up to it were a testament to my unwavering support for my son, a period where my own aspirations had gradually taken a back seat to his. Since Eleanor's passing 15 years ago, my focus had narrowed, centering almost entirely on Arthur Jr. S.'s development and success. I had poured not only my love and attention, but also the inheritance she had left us, a substantial nest egg meant to ensure my own comfort in my later years, into Arthur Jr. S. Ventures. Each financial request, from the down payment on his first apartment to the capital for his fledgling business, had been met with my willing support. "Dad, this next investment is the one," he'd say, his eyes alight with conviction, and I, ever the doting father, would oblige, drawing from my own savings, deferring my own retirement plans. I'd bought him his first car, paid for his postgraduate studies, and even facilitated the purchase of his current apartment. a testament to Clara's refined taste and his own burgeoning success. Clara's entry into his life had been a noticeable shift. Her ambition was palpable, her desire for financial security evident in every word, every subtle manipulation aimed at Arthur Jr.'s ear. I recalled instances where Clara had suggested I look into certain investment opportunities, often with exceptionally high returns promised. Opportunities I had later discovered were either overly risky or non-existent. I'd dismissed these concerns, attributing them to Clara's eagerness to integrate into the family and Arthur Jr.'s youthful optimism. I had always believed in second chances, in the inherent goodness of my son, and in the power of a stable family unit. Eleanor, my late wife, had always been the more cautious one, her gentle warnings often lost in my own optimistic nature. "Theodore," she'd say, her brow furrowed with concern, "Arthur is a good boy, but Clara, she has a way of making things seem brighter than they are. Be careful with your heart and your wallet." Her words, meant as gentle counsel, now echoed with a prophetic resonance, a lament for the years of unquestioning faith I had placed in my son and his chosen partner. I remembered filling out transfer forms, signing over funds, each act a brick in the foundation of the life I believed Arthur Jr. was building, a life I thought would one day reflect the sacrifices I had made. I had believed in the inherent goodness of my son, in the strength of our family bonds, in the security of a legacy built on years of hard work and devotion. That belief, I now understood with crushing clarity, was the most significant sacrifice of all, a foundation built on sand. Each dollar transferred represented not just a financial transaction, but a piece of my trust, a fragment of my hopes for his future, a belief in the inherent decency that should bind a family. The wedding, meant to be the pinnacle of this shared vision, had become its undoing. My desperate attempts to rationalize the empty bank account, the sheer impossibility of my entire savings simply vanishing overnight, dissolved with each unanswered call to Arthur Jr.'s mobile. The wedding photos, which Clara had so eagerly shared, now seemed like cruel taunts. Clara beaming, Arthur Jr. looking relieved rather than joyous, surrounded by Clara's family, their faces radiating a shared sense of triumph that conspicuously excluded me. My own photo album, filled with pictures of Arthur Jr.'s childhood, his graduation, his early business successes, felt like relics from a distant past, a life viewed through a distorted lens, a narrative I had painstakingly constructed. The truth, stark and brutal, began to emerge from the lingering fog of disbelief, piercing through the remnants of my paternal optimism. The wedding wasn't merely a celebration. It was the meticulously orchestrated exit strategy for a grand, devastating con. The financial depletion wasn't an error. It was a calculated theft, executed with chilling precision. Arthur Jr. hadn't simply disappeared. He had vanished, taking with him my life savings, my trust, and a significant piece of my heart. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. I had been a target, a source of funds for a crime perpetrated by my own son. The man I had raised, the man I had believed in with every fiber of my being, had orchestrated this elaborate deception, using the sanctity of marriage as his cover. My life, which I had carefully built upon a foundation of trust and familial loyalty, was suddenly crumbling around me. The comfortable retirement I had envisioned, the peaceful years ahead filled with Arthur Sr.'s memory and shared legacies, evaporated like mist in the morning sun. Anger, hot and sharp, began to simmer beneath the shock and disbelief. It wasn't just about the money, though the sheer scale of the financial loss was catastrophic. It was about the violation, the betrayal of everything I held dear, my trust, my love, my paternal role. My carefully constructed world, built on the assumption of unbreakable familial bonds, had been systematically dismantled by the very person I had sworn to protect and support. I sat in my study, the room that had once symbolized my professional success and personal comfort, now feeling like an empty shell, a monument to my misplaced faith. I looked at my hands, hands that had signed countless checks, built successful businesses, and held my son as a child, and saw them now as instruments of my own undoing. The truth was undeniable. I had been a fool, blinded by paternal love and an unwavering belief in my son's character. The consequences were catastrophic, reaching far beyond the depleted bank account. This was not just a financial loss, it was an existential one, a shattering of my reality, a stark confrontation with the void where my son used to be. The wedding, a symbol of continuity and family strength, had instead become the stage for its ultimate destruction. I was no longer a father. I was a victim, a mark, a fool who had poured his heart and soul into a well that ran dry without a single drop of genuine affection returned. Driven by a desperate need for answers, for a shred of explanation that could make sense of this unfathomable act, I decided to visit Arthur Jr. S. and Clara S. meticulously curated apartment, the one I had helped him secure with a generous down payment, the one that now represented the epicenter of my undoing. Perhaps, in person, faced with the reality of my presence, they would be forced to confront me, to offer some semblance of an explanation, however hollow, however late. As I approached their sleek, modern building, a structure Clara had insisted upon for its prestige and proximity to high-end boutiques, a knot of anxiety tightened in my chest, far more oppressive than the usual wedding-related nerves. I pressed the buzzer for Arthur Jr. S. unit. Silence. I tried again, a firm, insistent press, then a third time. Still no answer. A sense of dread, cold and absolute, washed over me, chilling me to the bone. I then reached for my phone, dialing Arthur Jr. S. mobile, the same phone that had gone straight to voicemail since yesterday morning. This time, to my immense surprise, it rang. My heart leaped with a desperate, fragile hope, a tiny spark against the encroaching darkness. Arthur Jr.? I managed, my voice tight, cracking with a mixture of relief and apprehension. A click, and then a distorted voice, heavily accented, replied, "This number is no longer in service." The line went dead, disconnected, erased. It was a brutal, undeniable confirmation, a final, chilling punctuation mark on their elaborate deception. They hadn't just stolen my money. They had erased me from their lives, from their future, from their very existence. I stood on the sidewalk, the city's relentless energy a painful counterpoint to my internal devastation. The sounds of the city blurred around me, the distant sirens, the laughter of passers-by, the ordinary bustle of life, a stark, painful contrast to the seismic shift that had occurred within me. They were gone, vanished, and with them, my son, my trust, and my financial security. The wedding, I now understood with sickening clarity, had been the final curtain call on a performance of filial devotion, a meticulously planned exit strategy. The anger, which had been simmering beneath the shock and disbelief, now threatened to consume me entirely. It wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a calculated, deliberate act of destruction, a crime perpetrated with a cold, unnerving precision. The wedding had been the elaborate cover, the final act in a drama of deceit. As I stood there on the sidewalk, the city's relentless energy, a painful counterpoint to my internal devastation, a profound sense of clarity, sharp and cold, began to cut through the lingering shock and despair. They had taken my money, my trust, and my son. But they had not taken my will, nor my dignity. They had orchestrated their escape, their ultimate act of betrayal, with a chilling precision. But in doing so, they had also inadvertently unleashed something within me. This wasn't just about reclaiming lost funds, it was about reclaiming myself. I turned away from their silent, empty apartment, my steps no longer faltering but purposeful, imbued with a new, unexpected resolve. My first act of defiance wouldn't be to chase them, to beg for answers, or to plead for explanations from the void they had left behind. My first victory would be to refuse to be defined by their actions, to refuse to let their betrayal shatter the core of who I was. I walked not towards the comforting familiarity of my home, which now felt tainted and threatened, but towards the nearest police station. My voice, when I spoke to the desk sergeant, was steady, filled with a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. "My son has defrauded me," I stated, my gaze direct and unwavering. "He took everything I had, and then he disappeared. I want to file a report." It was a small step, perhaps, against a tide of immense loss and overwhelming betrayal, but it was my step. It was the first assertion of my will against their calculated destruction. It was the moment I refused to be a passive victim, to be defined solely by what had been taken from me. The anger, the despair, the humiliation of being duped by my own son, the sheer audacity of his crime. These were bitter pills, but in that moment, standing at the precipice of a new, unwelcome reality, I chose not to be broken. I chose to fight. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with the daunting prospect of legal battles and the crushing weight of emotional recovery. But in that single defiant act, I had taken the first crucial step towards reclaiming my own agency, and by extension, my liberation. The sterile, impersonal environment of the police station offered a stark contrast to the emotional chaos churning within me. The air was cool, smelling faintly of disinfectant and old paper, a world away from the perfumed opulence of the Crestwood Hotel. Detective Miller, a woman whose professional demeanor was tempered by a weary understanding of human failings, listened to my account with a focused intensity. Her gaze was steady, her questions precise, cutting through the fog of my emotional distress with the cold logic of an investigation. "Mr. Vance, Arthur Jr. What was his profession? Did he have any known associates involved in financial schemes? Any history of gambling, debts, or unusual behavior leading up to the wedding?" Her inquiries were not about the emotional devastation, the shattering of paternal love, but about factual evidence, about the mechanics of the crime, about the cold, hard data that could form the basis of a case. She explained the complexities of international wire transfers, the near insurmountable difficulty of tracking individuals who deliberately erase their digital footprints, and the paramount importance of gathering every piece of documentation I possessed. Bank statements showing the depleted accounts, wedding vendor invoices that underscored the pretense, any communication records, however seemingly innocuous they might appear now. "We'll issue an alert," she stated, her tone matter-of-fact, her eyes conveying a seasoned pragmatism. "But recovering the funds will be challenging, and locating him even more so. Your priority now, Mr. Vance, is to secure your remaining assets and prevent any further loss." Her counsel, though devoid of personal sympathy, was profoundly grounding. It offered a path, a structured approach to dealing with the overwhelming devastation, a way to channel my anger and despair into tangible action. She confirmed my suspicion that the wedding itself had been the elaborate cover, the final, brilliant act of a long-planned con. The efficiency of her office, the systematic way they began processing my report, the quiet determination in her eyes, provided a sliver of comfort in the encroaching darkness. This was not just a family tragedy, it was a crime, and in identifying it as such, a path forward, however dimly lit, began to emerge. She was my first ally, a professional force of order in the face of utter chaos, a stark reminder that justice, though often slow, was a tangible possibility. The days that followed the police report were a bleak landscape of administrative tasks and a gnawing, pervasive emptiness. The house, once filled with Arthur Sr.'s comforting presence and the vibrant echoes of Arthur Jr.'s childhood, now felt cavernous, each silent room an accusation, each cherished object a painful reminder of the life that was rapidly being dismantled and stolen. The silence, once a balm, was now broken only by the phantom buzz of my phone, a constant, agonizing reminder of the connection that had been so brutally severed, the calls that would never come. I found myself wandering through rooms, my fingers tracing familiar surfaces, touching objects that once held profound meaning, now tainted by the corrosive sting of betrayal. It was during one of these solitary, aimless walks through the neighborhood, walks I had taken countless times before, usually en route to the market to pick up groceries or to the bank to process transfers, but now driven by a restless unease and a desperate need to escape the suffocating atmosphere of my own home, that I found myself standing outside the office of Mr. Davies, an estate lawyer whose name Arthur Sr. had mentioned once in passing as a reliable, discreet professional, a name I had never needed until this devastating moment. Hesitantly, I pushed open the door, the quiet hum of efficiency within the office a stark contrast to the tempest raging in my mind. Mr. Davies, a man with kind eyes and a reassuringly calm demeanor, listened patiently as I recounted the events of the past week, my voice trembling at times, the narrative punctuated by pauses as I struggled to articulate the depth of my pain and disbelief. He examined the documents I had brought, the purported final will, Clara's threatening email, the curt legal letter, his brow furrowing as he read. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice grave, "this is highly irregular. The circumstances surrounding the execution of this will, especially given your husband's condition and the apparent lack of transparency, raise serious questions. There may be grounds to contest this will, particularly if we can demonstrate undue influence or a lack of proper legal counsel for Mr. Vance Sr. in his final days." His words, though offering a fragile flicker of hope, also underscored the enormity of the challenge ahead. This was no longer just a matter of emotional hurt. It was a legal battle for my home, my security, my very identity. The sheer audacity of Arthur Jr.'s actions, the calculated nature of his deception, had stripped away layers of paternal optimism and naive trust, leaving behind a raw, unvarnished clarity about the true state of my family relationships. I spent hours poring over my financial records, not just to gather evidence for Detective Miller, but to truly understand the extent of what had been taken. The sheer volume of money, the years of sacrifice represented by each transfer, each investment Arthur Jr. had requested, it was staggering. It wasn't just about the monetary value, it was about the misplaced trust, the emotional currency I had so freely spent, believing it was an investment in love and loyalty. I realized with a painful clarity how much of my life had been defined by Arthur Jr.'s needs, how his aspirations had dictated my financial decisions, how my own goals and desires had been placed on indefinite hold, waiting for a future that now seemed like a cruel illusion. The house, once a symbol of my stability, my anchor in the world, now felt like a stark reminder of my vulnerability, a space that could be taken from me at any moment. Yet, as I sat in Arthur Sr.'s study, surrounded by his well-worn books and cherished mementos, a quiet determination began to take root, pushing back against the despair. Arthur Sr. had trusted me to manage his affairs, and I would not fail him now, nor would I fail myself. I started taking small, deliberate steps to reclaim my sense of self, to rebuild a life that was no longer solely defined by my son's needs or his betrayals. I visited Eleanor's grave, not in sorrow, but in quiet communion, sharing my plight, seeking her enduring wisdom and the strength she always seemed to possess. I went to the local art supply store, a place I hadn't visited in years, and bought canvases and paints, rediscovering a dormant passion for art that had been overshadowed by familial obligations. I started attending the bridge club meetings Mrs. Gable had recommended, forcing myself to engage, to converse, to be present in the moment, away from the suffocating shadow of Arthur Jr.'s betrayal. These were not grand gestures, but small, deliberate acts of self-preservation, tentative steps towards rebuilding a life that was solely my own, a life no longer dictated by the needs or deceits of others. The isolation was still profound, the loss of my son a gaping wound that ached with a constant, dull throb. But the burgeoning sense of self-reliance, the quiet strength unearthed by adversity, began to offer a fragile, yet persistent, glimmer of hope. Detective Miller's initial professional optimism about recovering the funds began to wane as the investigation progressed, each lead turning colder than the last. Arthur Jr. and Clara had vanished without a trace, their digital footprints expertly erased, their presence in the world seemingly dissolved. The wedding itself, Miller explained, had been a meticulously orchestrated event, with Clara's own family allegedly complicit in the setup, providing a seemingly legitimate backdrop for their elaborate departure. The funds, transferred through a complex web of offshore accounts and cryptocurrency, were proving maddeningly elusive, their trail vanishing into the vast anonymity of the global financial system. Detective Miller confirmed my worst fears. Arthur Jr. had systematically leveraged my accounts, draining them through a series of unauthorized transfers just hours after the wedding, disappearing with Clara, and likely using the stolen funds to establish a new life elsewhere, far from any accountability. The sheer scale of the deception, the calculated months-in-the-making criminal enterprise that had stolen not only my life savings, but my very sense of reality, was overwhelming. It wasn't just a moment of youthful recklessness. It was a premeditated act of profound betrayal. The wedding, the celebration of family unity, had been the final, crucial piece of their meticulously planned exit strategy. The emotional toll was immense. I felt violated, foolish beyond measure, and utterly alone. The house, once my sanctuary, now felt like a stark reminder of my vulnerability, a place where my deepest trust had been so brutally broken. I spent days sorting through Arthur Jr.'s belongings, a painful, cathartic process, searching for any clue, any scrap of information that might explain the depths of his deception, a futile attempt to make sense of the incomprehensible. Tucked away in a dusty box of old letters, hidden beneath childish drawings and school reports, I found a hidden journal. It wasn't Arthur Jr.'s, but Clara's. Reading its pages was like entering a chilling alternate reality, a precise chronicle of their elaborate plan, detailing their desperate financial situation, their methodical exploitation of my trust, and their cold, calculated decision to disappear immediately after the wedding. The journal named specific accomplices, including Clara's own brother, who, according to her meticulous entries, had facilitated the offshore transfers and provided crucial logistical support. This journal, discovered by chance, a hidden testament to their conspiracy, became the cornerstone of my defense, the tangible proof that this was not an impulsive act, but a deliberate, premeditated crime. It was the evidence I needed to present to Detective Miller, the key that could potentially unlock the path to justice, transforming my personal tragedy into a prosecutable case. The rising tension wasn't just about the financial loss. It was about the horrifying realization that the crime was far more intricate and malicious than I had initially understood, involving multiple participants and a disturbing level of premeditation. Armed with Clara's journal, its chillingly detailed confessions serving as undeniable proof and a renewed, steely sense of purpose, I returned to Mr. Davies, my trusted estate lawyer. He examined the journal with a grave expression, recognizing its immense potential as a critical piece of evidence. "This is damning, Theodore," he stated, his voice serious, his gaze meeting mine with a professional solemnity. "This provides motive and intent. It implicates others and clearly shows this was not a spur-of-the-moment act, but a well-orchestrated plan." Our strategy began to solidify around this damning evidence. We would use the journal to support Detective Miller's ongoing investigation, providing crucial leads and corroborating details. More importantly, it would form the bedrock of our case against Clara and any identified accomplices for fraud and conspiracy. Mr. Davies also advised me on the legal avenues available to freeze any assets that might be traced back to Arthur Jr. and Clara, though he cautioned that recovering the full amount would likely be a long, arduous, and potentially incomplete process. Detective Miller, upon reviewing the journal's contents, expressed a renewed determination. "This changes things significantly, Theodore," she acknowledged, her professional demeanor shifting from weary pragmaticism to focused resolve. It gives us actionable leads, names to pursue, and a clearer picture of the scope of this operation. We can now build a comprehensive case not just for theft, but for conspiracy and potentially fraud involving multiple parties. She immediately began the painstaking process of obtaining warrants, tracing complex financial links, and coordinating with international law enforcement agencies, a daunting task that underscored the seriousness of the situation. Meanwhile, Mrs. Gable and her bridge club became my steadfast anchors in the storm. They helped me navigate the overwhelming practicalities of my drastically reduced circumstances, organizing small, informal fundraisers to help with immediate expenses, offering invaluable emotional counsel, and providing a much-needed sense of community and shared humanity. They encouraged me to focus on rebuilding my life, reminding me, gently but firmly, that Arthur Jr.'s betrayal did not define my own worth, nor did it diminish the life I had built before him. I started attending therapy, a suggestion from Mrs. Gable, to process the complex, conflicting emotions of grief for the son I thought I knew, the simmering anger at the betrayal, and the profound sense of loss that permeated my days. The process was painful, often emotionally taxing, but undeniably cathartic, helping me to reframe the narrative from one of helpless victimhood to one of resilient self-preservation. I began to meticulously document every aspect of my life that had been impacted, not just the financial devastation, but the emotional toll, the social isolation, and the psychological impact of such a profound breach of trust. This preparation wasn't just for a legal battle. It was for my own psychological recovery, a methodical process of reclaiming my narrative and rebuilding my sense of self-worth, piece by painstaking piece. The determination was clear, resonating within me like a battle cry. The war had officially begun, but I was ready to fight. The courtroom was a stark, impersonal space, its austere architecture and hushed atmosphere a world away from the festive yet ultimately hollow grandeur of Arthur Jr.'s wedding. The proceedings felt surreal, a legal battle against my own son, a man whose very existence had been intertwined with my deepest love and trust, now standing as an adversary. Clara, her face a carefully constructed mask of cold composure, sat beside her lawyer, Mr. Sterling, the same formidable litigator Arthur Jr. had engaged for their wedding, a man whose reputation for aggressive tactics preceded him. Sterling, with practiced efficiency, presented their defense, subtly portraying Arthur Jr. as a victim of his father's overly generous financial support, a young man trying to establish his independence, and painting me as an overly trusting parent who had been taken advantage of. They presented the wedding photos, the vendor invoices, and Arthur Jr.'s carefully crafted narrative of youthful financial struggles, all designed to create an impression of normalcy and deflect blame. Their key witness, Clara's brother, testified that Arthur Jr. had been acting independently, making his own business decisions, and that the substantial transfers from my accounts were legitimate business transactions. He presented a heavily edited version of events, omitting any mention of the wedding as a cover, their subsequent disappearance, or Clara's journal detailing their conspiracy. Then it was my turn to take the stand. Facing Arthur Jr. and Clara across the courtroom, their faces impassive, their eyes devoid of any recognition of the woman who had raised one and loved the other for so long, I felt a surge of unwavering resolve, a quiet strength that had been forged in the fires of betrayal. Mr. Davies guided me through my testimony, allowing me to speak directly to the court, to lay bare the truth of the past year, not with anger, but with the quiet, unwavering conviction of truth. I recounted the wedding, the empty bank account, the vanishing act. I presented Clara's journal, its pages filled with chillingly precise details of their conspiracy, the names of accomplices, the methodical planning. Detective Miller testified about the difficulty in tracing the funds and the evidence gathered pointing to a deliberate scheme. Mr. Harrison, Arthur Sr.'s business partner, testified to Arthur Sr.'s deep love for me and his unwavering commitment to my financial security, directly contradicting the narrative presented by Arthur Jr.'s defense. Mrs. Gable provided a powerful character reference for me, highlighting my stability, my resilience, and my unwavering devotion to my family, painting a picture of a loving parent, not a manipulated or mentally unfit individual. My own testimony was the emotional core of the trial. I spoke of my life with Arthur Sr., of his values, his deep affection for me, and the stark contrast between the man I knew and the man who supposedly signed that will. Arthur Sr. was a good man, I declared, my voice ringing with conviction, and he loved me. He would never have knowingly defrauded me, his wife, the mother of his only child. This theft was orchestrated by greed and manipulation. The cross-examination by Mr. Sterling was brutal, an attempt to portray my grief as delusion, my pursuit of justice as a desperate, irrational act. But I held firm, my answers clear, my emotions raw but honest, articulating the truth of my experience without wavering. The turning point came when Mr. Davies presented the forensic analysis of Arthur Sr.'s signature, revealing subtle inconsistencies that suggested it may have been traced or manipulated, a detail that sent a palpable ripple of shock through the courtroom. The carefully constructed facade of Arthur Jr. and Clara's claims began to crumble, exposed by the undeniable weight of truth and the collective testimonies of those who knew Arthur Sr. best. The judge, Justice Sterling, a woman known for her impartiality and her unwavering dedication to upholding justice, delivered her verdict after a tense period of deliberation that felt like an eternity. She acknowledged the overwhelming evidence presented, particularly Clara's journal, which meticulously detailed the conspiracy and the testimonies that spoke to Arthur Sr.'s declining health and the suspicious circumstances surrounding the will's execution. She highlighted the consistent intent of Arthur Sr. to provide for me, as evidenced by Eleanor's personal correspondence and Mr. Harrison's testimony, and noted the forensic inconsistencies in the signature's execution. While the signature on the will appears to be Mr. Vance Sr.'s, Justice Sterling stated, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom, the evidence of undue influence and lack of clear intent, particularly concerning the disinheritance of his wife and the apparent haste in its execution, is compelling. Therefore, this court rules that the will dated date is invalid. The previous will, which ensures Eleanor Vance's rightful inheritance and security, shall stand. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the room, a palpable release of tension. I had won. It wasn't just about regaining the money, though that was a crucial component of justice. It was about vindication. It was about proving that truth, however buried, would ultimately prevail. Arthur Jr. and Clara, their faces ashen, were escorted from the courtroom by bailiffs. Their calculated scheme, so meticulously planned, had unraveled, exposed by the unwavering commitment to truth and the collective weight of evidence and testimony. Justice, in this instance, had been served not with vengeance, but with the quiet, profound affirmation of what was right. The days following the court's verdict were suffused with a profound sense of quiet victory and a deep, restorative relief that seeped into my very bones. The house, once the looming specter of my impending loss, the physical embodiment of my deepest betrayal, was now a sanctuary reclaimed, its familiar walls breathing with the echoes of a life truly lived, a life now secured against further predation. I walked through each room, my fingers tracing the worn wood of the banister Arthur Sr. and I had chosen together, my gaze lingering on the faded photographs on the mantelpiece. Snapshots not of a fading past, but of a vibrant history built on love, trust, and shared dreams. The victory in court had not erased the sharp sting of betrayal, the deep wound left by my son's actions, but it had irrevocably shifted the ground beneath my feet, paving the way for a genuine healing, a process of rebuilding that began not with forgetting, but with integrating the painful lessons learned. I reached out to Arthur Jr., not with the triumphant anger of a victor, but with the weary hope of a father seeking a semblance of understanding, a distant echo of the son I once knew. I invited him for coffee, not in the grand, impersonal setting of the Crestwood Ballroom, but in my own kitchen, the true heart of our home. The place where so many meals, so many conversations, so many memories had unfolded. Clara was conspicuously absent from this tentative overture, her presence having been the catalyst for so much of the conflict, her role in the deception too profound to overlook. Arthur Jr. arrived, his demeanor subdued, the arrogance and bravado of his earlier attempts at disinheritance replaced by a palpable unease. We spoke, not of accusations or blame, but of the past, of his father's enduring values, of the fundamental importance of family, and of the devastating, often irreversible, consequences of greed. I didn't seek to punish, but to convey the profound depth of his transgression and the possibility, however distant and fragile, of eventual reconciliation. He offered a hesitant apology, a murmur that lacked the conviction of true remorse, but acknowledged, at least, the damage inflicted. It was a start, a single tentative step towards bridging a chasm of deceit that had threatened to swallow us all. The house, my home, was no longer merely a symbol of what I had fought to reclaim. It was a vibrant testament to my resilience, a physical manifestation of my renewed spirit. I began to make subtle, yet significant changes, not to erase the painful memories, but to imbue the space with my own evolving sense of self, my own evolving joy. I repainted the living room a brighter, more optimistic hue, reflecting the newfound lightness in my spirit. I curated a new collection of art that spoke to my personal tastes and interests, independent of any familial obligation. I created a dedicated space for my long-neglected passion for gardening, transforming a neglected corner of the yard into a vibrant oasis of color and life. The quiet moments spent in my home were no longer shadowed by dread or anxiety, but filled with a profound sense of peace and deep contentment. I spent more time with Mrs. Gable and the other neighbors who had offered their unwavering support, their camaraderie a warm balm to the solitude I had once feared. I reconnected with friends I had gradually drifted from over the years, rediscovering the simple joy of genuine companionship, relationships built on mutual respect and shared experiences, not on financial obligation or unspoken expectations. I began to explore new interests, enrolling in classes in watercolor painting, a creative outlet I had abandoned years ago, and joining a local book club, activities that nourished my mind, expanded my horizons, and replenished my spirit. The house became more than just a physical space. It was a living reflection of my inner transformation, a sanctuary of strength, resilience, and quiet, abiding joy. One crisp autumn afternoon, as I sat on my porch swing, watching the leaves of the ancient oak tree Arthur Sr. had planted shortly after we moved into the house, a symbol of our enduring love and shared future, a profound sense of peace settled over me, deep and unwavering. The house was quiet, filled with the gentle hum of a life finally lived on my own terms. The sun warmed my face, and the sweet scent of freshly turned earth from my garden filled the air, a fragrance of renewal and hard-won hope. I had faced my deepest fears, confronted betrayal at its most devastating, and emerged not just intact, but stronger, wiser, and more fully myself than I had ever believed possible. The inheritance of lies, the foundation of my pain, had paradoxically led me to the greatest inheritance of all, the profound and unshakable truth of my own self-worth, and the unshakable freedom to live my life, finally, for myself. Arthur Jr. S. actions had been a brutal lesson, a shattering of illusions, but they had also been a catalyst. They had forced me to confront the extent to which I had allowed my identity to be subsumed by the needs of others, to the detriment of my own well-being. True love, I now understood, cannot be bought or sold. It is a freely given gift, never a transaction. And freedom, the freedom to live authentically, to pursue my passions, to simply be, is a treasure that is never too expensive, no matter the cost of acquiring it. My name was not vanished from my life, nor was my house. They were mine, in every sense of the word, a testament to a battle fought and won, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit, and a promise of a future finally lived with authenticity and joy. My name is Theodore Vance. I am 71 years old, and after a lifetime of giving, I have finally learned the invaluable lesson of self-preservation and self-love. The journey from the shock of betrayal to this quiet liberation had been arduous, marked by tears, anger, and a fear I once thought would consume me. But through it all, I discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. Arthur Sr.'s legacy wasn't just in the house. It was in the resilience he had instilled in me, in the unwavering love that, even in death, guided me back to myself. Arthur Jr. and Clara's actions, born of greed and a profound lack of character, had inadvertently freed me from a life lived in service of their desires, allowing me to finally live a life for myself. If my story resonated with you, if you saw a reflection of your own struggles or triumphs, or if it simply moved you, I would be deeply grateful for your support. Your engagement helps me continue to share these narratives of resilience and hope. Please consider leaving a comment below. I'm always eager to hear your thoughts. What would you do in my place? How would you navigate such a profound betrayal? Your perspectives are invaluable to me. For more stories of courage, the overcoming of adversity, and the quiet triumph of the human spirit, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. There are many other stories waiting to be told, each one a testament to the enduring power of truth and self-discovery.